Hey everyone, welcome. I'm Broadus Palmer, and usually you'll see me helping career changers go from uncertified and stuck to skilled and hired. But today we're going to be talking about the future of tech itself. It's 2026, and tech is just isn't getting faster; it's getting noisier. So for the person that's starting their tech journey, it's pretty much overwhelming. And for the executive sitting in C-suite, it's expensive. And traditional monitoring is failing, and cloud bills are spiraling, and complexity is becoming the hidden tax of every business. But today, we're going to show you how to turn that complexity into outcomes. And we are bridging the gap between the engine room and the boardroom. So joining me today, and we're going to break this down, I got two of the best in the game. We got Joe Stevens. This man fixes the strategies that fail. So he is a powerhouse in specializing in turning massive tech migrations into actual business wins. So welcome, Joe.
Thanks, Travis. Happy to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you, man. And second, we have Clinton Davenport. This is our digital value and investment strategist. So Clinton's superpower is translation. He's taking complex apps and tech decisions and turning them into measurable financial outcomes that leaders actually can. So Clinton, glad to have you, brother.
Thanks for having me aboard. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, man. So if you are ready, get your notes out on your iPad or your phone. Make sure you take notes because these two gentlemen are going to be dropping some gems. And this is a perfect place to learn more about AI and operations, governance, all of that good stuff. So, gentlemen, ready? We're just going to get into the meat and potatoes.
Sounds like a good time. Let's go.
All right. So for a beginner, right, AI ops is just a fancy word for automation, or is it a system that actually makes decisions on its own?
So that's a good question. I think really what you described is if it's a system, it's the outcome of what an AIOps discussion should start from, right? So it's the end goal is to have a system that can help make decisions on its own in autonomy. Like, and we'll get into that later. But the truth is AIOps, its place belongs at that space right at the strategy phase when you start looking at early adoption. That's my opinion on that. Just because of the fact that there's so much that people are using today for monitoring solutions, things like that, and how the process is to incorporate that in your existing landscape, and then build off of that. So I don't know, Clinton, what's your thoughts on that?
It depends. The famous answer for so many things. When we think about the traditional what is AIOps, I think it's just a new iteration of how we're doing traditional operations and adding an LLM overlay onto it.
Okay.
In that regards. And we have long struggled with how much data is out there and are we truly leveraging that data to its maximum capabilities. And let's be honest, no human can really do that. But can a machine, where we have it being able to connect to multiple things and having a conversation with it in natural language to quickly iterate through all that data for us? Yeah, that's a whole new game changer for the industry. And this is where we're starting to see AIOps take off heavily within the organizations that we're having communication with on a daily basis.
So at this moment, we have more data than humans can look at. So is the complexity tax basically the cost of our teams being paralyzed because they don't know which alert to look at first?
I think part of that is data overload, data gravity, if you can call it that. But there's also other areas as well too where it comes into play. So the complexity tax really covers data. It covers poor hygiene from a cultural perspective within a company. It covers skills gaps, like all sorts of things in that area as well too that can cause some of those problems. So data is, to your point on data, that data gravity thing is a big point, right? So
when you say data gravity, right? So treat me like I'm a beginner. What does data gravity even mean?
So Newton's law of gravity says that something has it's more mass and it has stronger pull, right? It's the same type of situation there. You have an overload of data. From a traditional perspective, you can't expect your operations teams or your development teams to have to leverage data that comes across as well to be able to parse the data because there's just too much noise, right? And that noise becomes convoluted to the point to where a lot of operations teams just can't make sense of it. And it's been a problem for decades. Whenever I was early in my career, I supported the network operations center in Tulsa, Oklahoma for MCI World Cup. And their data overload was insane. We were pushing out telemetry logs for them to read, and they would have issues where we would have an outage that would happen, say, on the West Coast or East Coast, and we wouldn't go for 3 hours. We had a situation where to cover a dark day in our history at 9/11, where we had a pop on top of the Tower 2, North Tower, or whatever it was, when it collapsed. We didn't know that we had to route traffic from that pop because it took 3 hours for us to get that data. The only reason why we were able to actually recover is because we just assumed, hey, that pop's gone, right? So we had to go through the process of routing it, but we didn't start getting signals back. Not, for example, AI has exposed that all at once. Right? That's the problem with a lot of companies is now you have something that's been traditionally a problem amplified by the amount of data that's able to parse through and kind of go through that process. In my opinion, data gravity is a point where something gets so top heavy that it collapses. It makes it where you have real issues with being able to get meaningful data, things like that as well.
Okay. So I just want to point this out. I know we live, but Joe, you sound a little far away.
Oh, sorry.
So I just want to make sure everyone can hear you. Okay. So you talk about sites going down, but let's say if our site goes down for an hour, it's not just a tech issue. For some cases, it's a front page issue. So how does AIOps help us find the smoke before the fire, and before the fire actually burns the building down?
Yeah, it's when we start thinking about how organizations are starting to go about doing this, some organizations have started long before the LLM agent came out, and we saw with ChatGPT and stuff like this. And what we're saying when we're talking about that is we have a long time always had logs coming in. You've had system logs, application logs, security logs. You have DNS logs, DHCP logs. You have all these different log streams coming in, and the data's been sitting there. We've just not been proactive in how we've maybe been approaching that. You have APM tools that are out there, and what we're starting to see now out of the more mature organizations that have been really pushing this envelope is using machine learning. Now, what we're talking about with AIOps, I think it's just the iteration of that with that agent on top of it, where you're actually, it should be looking at that stuff, but also being a little bit more, having a little bit more logic, maybe even doing some additional testing, which is what we're seeing with AIOps and automation around this. An agent gets deployed out to go out and say, hey, can you go look at this? It goes out and tests those things, starts validating stuff before a human actually gets involved. Maybe it's sending alert in parallel, but in parallel, it's doing those things, collecting those things, adding that into a frameworks of however that team, however their operation run book is, and it's following that process to do those things. So when we think about that risk to organizations as they're starting to adopt these things, there's some really basic things that we have to think about. And even like one thing that we see with AIOps that I'm seeing that's causing a lot of paralysis is the analysis of this. And they're trying to include too much in this landscape of things and the governance and things like that. And Joe and I were talking about this the other day, like, is it governance or is it AIOps that we go with first, or what is this, and we've been debating about it for quite a bit. Joe, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, governance is very important, but I think governance is defined by AIOps in that AIOps needs to be part of the initial planning phase. That's because we can identify what we currently have, right, and then build around that. Right? So I think really, in my opinion, this is my opinion on that, is AIOps comes first, primarily because that will define how we govern things like LLM access or access to specific types of tools, or more importantly, from a AIOps perspective, monitoring suites, things like that as well too, right? So there may be some specific legacy monitoring suites that may not work or jive with kind of modern platforms, for example. That's where AIOps can come into play and help identify those early on, right? So to me, AIOps has multiple phases. The first phase is the cultural shift. And when I say cultural shift, it's a cultural reincorporation of what they already have today from an operations perspective. But it's a shift in leveraging and knowing what your tools are and how to actually parse the data you're looking for. Clinton, to your point, even with AI, again, data, all this data is exposed all at once. Now people are like, what do I do with this? Right. So it's being able to take an agentic approach and build out, specific types of agents that can help you look for situations on that. And you can define, hey, act as a network operation person that's looking for X amount of problems with drop nodes or something like that, and it would be able to report back to that and catch that before it happens. To your point, Bronis, that's how you stay out of the newspaper, right? And having that extra force multiplier that's kind of the second brain, so to speak.
Okay.
That because our brains can only process so much, and neural computing gives us the capability to expand beyond what our physiological incapabilities are.
So if when troubleshooting and trying to figure out things in your environment, if the common sense is like we always look at logs first, right? Why do you think companies haven't adopted the principle of using AIOps on top of what we're already doing? Is it because the complexity of trying to figure out what we're doing first, right? Like you said, governance or AIOps, or is it just the lack of adoption of the culture itself?
Fear. That's what it is. It really is. I mean, it's every day when I talk to clients, or I'm talking to people that are looking at industry shifts, they're afraid that AI is going to take their job. That's one of the slowest creeps on that causes the adoption slowdown. When you look at it from the perspective of not thinking it's going to take my job, but helping me more efficient in my job, right? To be able to catch things before they happen, so I can free up time. Take a step back and look at like a senior resource nowadays. If he doesn't have some sort of a deployment model where he can actually catch issues whenever he's developing or designing infrastructure, and then he has to spend X amount of hours troubleshooting a miss, for example. If he has an AI overlay that can catch that frees him up. But I think really one of the biggest things that slows down the adoption of AI is fear. It's not understanding how it works, and then it quickly flows not understanding how to use it. I mean, Clayton, what's your thoughts on that?
You said fear, and I'm sitting there going, is that really the right answer? And, I hate saying it like that, but okay, but hear me out. Okay, here it is. So I was like, okay, really that. And I was thinking, because my first inclination is to say that a lot of organizations that I walked into and was trying to kind of be one of the stewards of that shop from an IT perspective, is that they didn't put a lot of merit into like observability. I'm gonna just pick on AIOps and observability today, to just kind of make it a little bit easier. Because when we think about AIOps, it can be systems, it can be networking, it can be so many different things. But when I just think about observability, how many shops out there do they feel like they actually know what is going on in their environment? You were talking about, when you were at Verizon and some of the things that you were doing there, and that you guys weren't even aware of certain things. And I can see that, that's a very large organization, but even at that scale, there should be certain standards that every group should be doing. And we don't do that well. A lot of IT people, me coming up through the ranks, I know I wasn't really good at it until I started understanding, hey, if I do this, then this will directly affect my business and preventing it from being on the front page. If I know before somebody comes to me about something, then I'm coming out and telling my organization about an issue that we're seeing, a degraded service or something of that nature, and making it so important that that is our first line of defense. But a lot of organizations, I think, to your point, and this is the full circle here, is they're fearful of putting their time into doing observability at a level where it makes the organization not be reactive but more proactive. Right. And that's sometimes hard to map. That's sometimes hard to sell up. So I think you are correct. I think that fear is something. It's a fear of not having success or not doing what the organization is asking. Because I mean, I'll be honest, like I got in downright fights with CIOs, CEOs about, if I don't do this and I don't build a good foundation of what we're doing here, I can't get you to 3 nines. Simply as that. And don't even think about going to 4 nines, because without this, every time you add a 9 after 3 nines, we usually double the budget because that costs it that much. And so I think you are correct. Fear is the right answer. It's just, what kind of fear is it? Is it the FOMO? Is it fear of not getting it right? Or, hey, the other fear is when we start looking at it as a big ocean, we get this paralysis again.
Right.
And we see organizations day in and day out, they go round and round and round, and they're trying to plan it out. Sorry, can't do that anymore. All we can do is go out there, start knocking it down. And guess what? If you have to rebuild it, it's always going to be better in the 2.0, 3.0 version of it. You're going to continuously get better and faster. But ignoring it and not using the data that's already there, that's a big miss by organizations.
And it's important to understand that ignoring it, right? So I'll give a hypothetical situation, because I'm not sure I'm allowed to completely talk about it, but there was a large telco company that Quentin mentioned earlier that had absorbed a new company that was doing video streaming. This was back in 2013-14 timeframe. During the Super Bowl, of all things, they had an outage, and it actually affected West Coast and Central United States pretty significantly. And the whole discussion was Nagios. Why didn't Nagios catch this? Blah blah blah. And it's like, we were trying to tell you guys all along that Nagios had deficits, and we needed to spend the 6 months building up to this, building out the platform. But you chose to go with this other company's platform because it existed and it was a path of least resistance. The problem with that is the cleanup of that got the attention all the way up to the CEO of the company at the time, right? And he brought down the hammer, like, guys, we got to fix this. And all of a sudden, it went from being an afterthought to now it was a priority. And then everybody had an opinion of that. All different organizations, the company we absorbed, all this stuff like that. And we spent, and this is more complexity tax when we talk about this, we spent more time trying to sort out the one single tool that we had already decided on 6 months before this happened. And 6 months later, we finally said, oh yeah, go do what the headquarter planning team told us to do 7 months ago. Now, right.
It's tying that to that dollar amount, and that's what this is all about. When it comes down to it, it's just like, how do we, and sometimes you can't quantify it. When we talk about, like you're talking about the brand of that organization and the impact that it had, of what maybe they were indirectly, but it's something that brand is everything. How you're being perceived in the market space, and and these things can affect that. It's we like to try to put a number on everything. Can we always? No. But can we talk about how we can definitely play out these scenarios? And these are great examples, Joe, that you're bringing up, because I mean, that hits some watermark right there for me. Yeah, that's how I sell it. Yeah.
If we had an AI overlay on that, we would have caught a lot more. Right? I mean, I back in the day, AI was Lisp. I don't know if you guys knew about that programming language. I had a guy who was a Lisp genius, and he was building stuff like this. This was in 2005, 2006 timeframe. He was building, code for a company that Walmart actually bought the whole code from. He's retired at like 30. It's crazy. But his whole premise was build out, an AI and autonomous approach to be able to catch problems and deficits with a CPM, collaborative program management tool, right? Fast forward to now, we have tools that are tens of thousands times more powerful than Lisp ever was, because that's a programming, right? You have actual neural networks, things like that as well too. If we had the capability back in 9/11 or up into the phase where we were working for that merger, stuff like that, we would have never had these type of issues. So the important part about that is getting ahead of it now. AIOps is a discussion you need to have today. Like if it's not phase 1, it's phase 1.1. Like it's got to be in there, right? And that's kind of where it's that sense of urgency needs to be built across the industry, because if you don't have an AIOps plan, you're going to have financial, brand, and talent hits. You're gonna have people quitting because they're tired of having to, burn their weekends and working 80-hour weeks because they, don't have the right tools to keep them where they can keep their environments up.
So my question around that too is, I'm looking at it from like an employee standpoint, right? And what you always talking about, like it could be fear, right? Fear of missing out, right, etc. Doesn't this create like a vicious cycle where the fear of missing out has them spend more money to try to be first in things, but not having the right culture implemented, and then expecting the employees to be able to fix the problems and come up with creative strategies with AI, which in turn have the employees not really feeling comfortable or feeling, what's the word I'm looking for, supported because the lack of culture. And then they reach out to employees to hire and expect them to come in with the expertise when they don't even have the structure to even support them to reach the goals they're trying to reach. So it's just like a cycle for me outside looking in, right? You all been working with execs for years, but outside looking in, it's just like a cycle of spending money and they don't even know where they're spending it. They don't even know the direction they're going, but yet they want people to come in with this expertise and they have no idea the return on investment on this thing.
This is cloud 2.0 again, right? Same situation.
Yeah.
Promo drill. Everybody's like, oh, come on, we got to go do this. We got to deploy to AWS or Azure or whatever, right? And they don't know what they're doing. So everyone's favorite cuss word from 3 years ago. Clinton, you want to talk about the center of excellence? Can it help? So, that no, I don't want to harp on that. That's played out, but it's strategy.
It still rings true, though. It does. I think it's just the way people think about it, and I think it's just how you approach it. At the end of the day.
Well, you have organizations that want to buy something. It goes back to our culture of like instant gratification. I want to buy an AI center of excellence. I want to buy a CCOE. You can't buy it. It's a cultural adoption. You can get around it. You have someone like Clinton or me or someone like that come in and show you how to put the strategy in place so that you can retain talent and hire the right people. As part of an AI center of excellence or even a cloud center of excellence, it skills gaps analysis, for example. Understanding where your weaknesses are, because you're going to break at your weakest link, right? So it's super important to have that strategy in place. You've got to have that locked in, because if not, you're just shooting in the dark. And brought us to your point, it's just a vicious cycle that's been happening for the last 15, actually really 30 years of being around. New adoption, go do this. Virtualize for the sake of virtualization. We have applications that couldn't be local. It's the same scenario.
So there's a question for the job seekers too, right? So if AI handles the boring, repetitive tickets, what does the job look like in the next 2 years? And should they be worried or should they be excited?
I think they should be excited. Now, the challenge is, how do you get experience that warrants you being able to understand how things. This brings up a great conversation around where I was having it with one of my team members one time, and he was asking me, and this is funny enough, it's all about observability. He was asking me, he's like, well, Clinton, why do you tend to kind of like cringe when we start talking about observability? And you have these fears of these things. Well, 20 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, even, we didn't have the luxury of going out and buying tools like, PRTG or, any of the data dogs or any of the stuff that's out there today. We had to actually go build out your entire environments. We had to have servers. And if you didn't have your servers set up where they had redundancy or even things outside of your network, how would you even be alerted about those things in some of these organizations that were working? Because frankly, you had to build the infrastructure. Now you can go out, give them a credit card, and next thing you know, you have services that you can actually do observability from all over the world. And so when we think about what's happening with AIOps and where you're adding these LLMs, allowing you not to have to go do that grunt work. And I'm talking about like having to pull in and correlate logs across multiple instances of systems that could be spread across the whole United States where you're having issues even getting into those systems. Mm-hmm. Now you have this thing where, hey, more than likely your logs are already be sent into a central place. You have an agent that can sit on top of that and be able to actually do queries and say, hey, pull back all the logs that might be associated with this application if you have done your tagging correctly and all the things that you do as far as foundational. And when you're sitting there being able to do that, it definitely helps with that balance. You're talking about that life balance. Really what I always fear, and I still fear for most people who are in operations, is simply burnout. It is extremely easy to get burned out because it's great feeling like the knight coming in on a white horse, and with your sword up, and you're gonna solve the problems for them and get back online. I hated that model. My model was, I wanted to do the things that are important today that need to be done, but they're not urgent. And so if we can do those important things, and so that's where AIOps is helping people move from that urgent reactive nature to being, okay, this is becoming more important, we can't ignore it, or it's going to become urgent. And so this is allowing for team members. So what I'm saying though about what happens and what's going to be hard for people is, without that experience and that pain of having to go out and do those systems, it might be hard to conceptualize what they might need to be doing, or asking the agents to go through those things because they haven't had to go do it manually. But that's okay. But that's part of the learning that we're going to have to change. And frankly, we need people that come in and look at things in a whole new way, because us old people who have gone through all this and have these scars, maybe there's an easier way. We always need to be iterating and making ourselves better and faster and stuff like that. And that's where I see, like, operations isn't going away. So it's a great time to still be in the industry. Yeah. Are the skill sets changing? Absolutely. But to Joe's point in the last session that we had, he talked about having to retool himself. We're having to retool. That's the weirdest thing about this whole thing right now, is everybody's having to retool. We're all having to think about, how do we redo our processes?
Yeah.
And that's where AIOps comes in. It's like, now writing an RCA is super easier than it used to me having to sit down and go pull out all the times and everything else. And guess what? What are we just talking about? We're now saving time. So when we talk about this from an executive perspective, we're talking about mean time to resolution, mean time to getting, things, response times out, as far as getting those things. And so now we're saving team members time. I know a lot of financial departments don't like to quantify that we're saving, that saved time. Well, I'm still having to pay the employee. But if you can do more and get more out and get more feature sets out, there is a direct indirect correlation for you, and you're not having to grow teams.
Yeah.
Okay, with doing more.
Yeah. So as you talk about finances and what companies care about, so forget the technical jargon, what is the number one thing an executive should look to know if their AI ops investment was worth the check they signed?
The easiest way to do it, in my personal opinion, is, and this is the one I usually recommend, is let's go look at your service tickets right now. What are the top 10 tickets? What of these tickets can we really go out and actually look at? When I would come into organizations, those were the things I always had in especially my service desk, or even my networking team, or my unified communications group, whoever it was, whatever for them. Every quarter we went through, what is the top 10 tickets? And what is those categories? And let's start working on number one. Once we get number one done, we'll go to number two. Make it very easy as far as a priority. If I can start showing that I'm lessening how many tickets I'm having coming in through my ticket desk, and I can start showing that, that's a direct correlation. That's one way to quantifying it. The other one is simply uptime, downtime, planned downtime and unplanned downtime. That was another one that, when I came into some organizations, we had in excess of 300 plus hours across 700 application stacks per quarter. By the time I walked out of there, we were down to less than 15 a quarter. And that simply was just sitting down and really giving a hard look at, how do we do these observability things, putting that LLM on top of this to be able to go out and start pulling and cross-correlating that data, and having an agent that can actually go talk to it. You don't even have to build an agent to go out and do anything to be actionable yet. So you're not taking any risk. All you're doing is adding stuff on top to make it easier for you to query against that data and information that you have. So now you can actually go into your ticket system and say, what are my top 10 tickets for this group? All right, now we know what that is. And then go start working after it, and making that in like a small project. That's how we always did. We did in sprints. I always tried to move us from more of an agile shop.
So
yeah, and Clinton, Clinton, to your point on that too. You guys have ever read the Phoenix Project?
Oh yeah,
great book. He talked about a specific engineer that they had that was the guy who kept everything working. And then one of the outcomes of that was that he could have done so much more if he would have been freed up from having to be on every outage call. At the executive level, they know who their players are. They know who their top dogs are, the guys and gals that are just really good at their jobs. I think one of those things is looking at viability and capabilities and how much time those engineers, architects, the really top tier talent are able to contribute to furthering a product or getting features, as Clinton said earlier, out of space as well too. So that's another important piece there, right? Think about it this way: from an AIOps perspective, if you have a scenario where you're watching for trends and you catch an outage type situation because of degradation of service or code bugs or something like that, and say you catch it 48 hours before crash would happen, right? That would normally be a sub 1 outage, right? And you'd have your top talent all on there trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
So it just turns into a project. Now you can go fix it. It's a bug fix at that point, right? So, and then you actually can show that to your board members if you're publicly traded or even privately traded, saying, hey, look, we built this capability of catching problems before they become an issue. But GenTK SDLC is a real thing, right? I had a discussion about that earlier today with some folks. That kind of approach shows that return on investment as well too, because they see consistent outcomes of, persistency in their environments, but also more importantly, at the end of the day, they see product being turned out quicker as well too, because their talent, the people who they hired to do this job, aren't tied up fixing break fix, things like that.
Joe, real quick, I want to ask. Sorry about that, Broadus. But I want to ask Joe a quick question about this, because when I started thinking about what you're saying, and you think about your legacy around K8s and everything that you've done with that, how do you see AIOps factoring into that? Because how are y'all identifying when y'all needed to spin down nodes that were misbehaving or stuff like that? Do you see this taking that to another level from that perspective?
Yeah, when you start applying AI to control planes, for example, right, inside of a Kubernetes environment, that's going to be a massive, massive game for you. Especially when you start talking about namespace drift, or you start talking about issues with node viability, things like that as well too, from microservices perspective.
Yeah.
And you have that type of, because that will truly leverage the scalability that's been pushed by Docker, Kubernetes, all the different OpenShift, things like that as well. Because now you have, again, the second brain that can help catch it before it happens. Now, it can go crazy sometimes. I'm not saying it's foolproof. You could have something where you're just moving a microservice across different nodes because it's hung up in hallucination world, right? You have to get self fantasy world where nothing's working right. But the more important part is when it's fine-tuned, that will be a massive game changer, because that means you don't have your developers. I mean, I can tell you straight up, the DevOps shop running, for their SDLC, and they're pushing stuff out to Kubernetes cluster, for example, for microservices. You've got a large group of guys and gals that are experts spending a lot of time troubleshooting Kubernetes whenever they need to be pushing out code updates, things like that as well. In fact, I consulted for a shop that was using canaries as part of their CI/CD process, right? And they couldn't use it because they were so busy fixing, their deployment code in their upper environments in production, to where they couldn't do canaries because Kubernetes had problems. That's the biggest issue. We fixed that by moving to EKS. It's a big deal, pretty awesome, right? And, you have to tap Jesse Leonard on that one. That was a fun project, but it was a headache though for those folks. You implement now OpenShift. I'm not doing this for a product push, but I will say OpenShift. So Red Hat's doing some pretty rad stuff right now with their control plane layer, and really all the way down to their cluster node layers using AI, which is going to be a big deal, right? But remember, IBM's always been a big player in AI anyways, because Watson's grandpa to all these other AI environments. It's a pretty massive deal when they start looking at this type of play there. Now we're starting to see AWS adopt it into, with Bedrock-enabled Kubernetes EKS. You're seeing Microsoft pushing out their Microsoft AI into AKS. All this stuff's coming at a massive, massive speed. Mm-hmm. We have to get the right resources to know how to use it and harness it. You can't just put an agent up there just to collect your data. It goes back to data gravity that we just talked about, right? And see, it's going to work because we have AI on it. The robots aren't going to fix your clusters without the human in the loop approach of being able to fine tune it. And that's something that's super important too. Human in the loop has to exist.
Yeah. And that goes back to what Broadus was talking about earlier, is like there still has to be a human looking at this. You can't trust it blindly. At the end of the day, it is not at that level. It is not. You still need human review around these things.
So I guess as we talk about Kubernetes, I just see, because I don't work with it a lot, but I just see it as some people see it as a necessary complexity and an unnecessary complexity. And adding an AI component on top, does it create more complexity for the employee to learn to navigate through the complex networks of nodes and pods and control planes?
For some,
Um,
but if they're not learning it already, they're going to have a problem, right? It's if you're not learning it already, you're going to be left behind. You'll be going back
yeah,
to your job or something like that.
but still, too, like, so what I want everybody to understand is, if you're just beginning, right, you shouldn't be going out trying to figure out how to build an agent to do this and do that. This is for me. You should understand how everything works first. You should have the fundamentals, the foundations.
Yeah.
Because if you're talking about, ingesting logs and, creating agents to do certain things with certain types of logs that you tag to create certain outcomes, where if you haven't done that, then you wouldn't have the idea to understand if the agent was acting correctly, or even have some type of security vulnerability while you're doing it. So it's always great for y'all to go and just learn the fundamentals first. Don't just try to jump into this thing thinking like you're going to solve problems with it. I'm going to get a job. It's not going to work that way, right? Learn the foundations, the fundamentals, and then start solving those problems that you see that companies want you to solve. But for me, just be aware that while you're working to solve those problems, don't put too much pressure on yourself, because sometimes the company don't know how to solve it themselves.
Right.
So that's just me. Y'all thoughts on that, Clinton? Because I see Clinton like, wow, no, let me get it here, tell him.
That could be subscribed to any person at any phase in their career, right? If you're just getting to it, learn it, eat it all up right now, become the best in it. So whenever you go and get that first job, you're ahead of the other folks that have the bad hygiene, that are like, well, the grumpy old guy that's, like me, like, oh, I've done it my way, I'm just going to keep doing it this way. Shout out to a guy named Mike Miles back when I first got into the industry, who it was his way or the highway. He got left behind. Like, it's the same type of scenario there. So if you've been doing this for 30 years, better start learning it, because you're going to retire early if you don't. Right?
Yeah.
So, and shout out to Kerry Wilhite, the super recruiter out there. It's good to see you too.
Hey, Kerry, how you doing?
I mean,
Thanks for joining.
To answer your question, I don't know. I don't. One thing I don't disagree with you is you're not going to get the job if you think you can just go out and use a chat agent or just any kind of chat bot to talk to it, or one of these LLMs. It's just not going to happen, because when you're going to get exposed very quickly, to your point, without knowing those fundamentals.
Yeah.
It amazed me over the years, the people I interviewed, it would, depending upon the role, some of the basic stuff I would ask. I mean, I'd start with the very bottom, like, what does DHCP mean? Just explain to me what it does. And, these are people that would have certifications or degrees and stuff like that. You really do need to understand the fundamentals of it. And it's just to hand out an IP address. That's all I was looking for somebody to say. And sometimes they're like, I don't know what that is. And I'm like, okay, that tells me where you're at, but at the same time, I want people who are curious. Like, when you're you should just be always exploring things. To what Joe's saying is, like, you got to constantly be learning. It's pushing that boundary. So sometimes just playing with things before you actually had the fundamentals, it happens. And it happened a lot for me from that perspective. And I had to learn the hard way of, sometimes just go sit down and read the information and read the documentation, because you'll save yourself. Go watch some, get on one of these level up platforms and do some of the basics of those things, because it will save you time in the end. And that's where we see a lot of this challenging. And we're sitting here talking about, how these LLMs are going to, in my mind, they're almost like cheat agents, because the one thing my dad taught me coming up in IT, my dad was an IT consultant. I got dragged around. I hated computers at that time as a kid. All I cared about was wanting to play soccer. And I did that for a long time. But what my dad, I appreciate it now when I look back at what he would never fix my problems for me. He'd be like, what's the next step. I heard that phrase so many times, it made me sick. I hated it because I'm like, just tell me what the next step is so I don't have to sit here and try to figure it out. But it was that sitting down, reading through forums, reading things, and trying to understand what my problem was and trying to correlate it to somebody else's problem. Now you have these LLMs that can actually give you those next steps so easily of like, okay, go try this, try this, try this, and you can put in there the errors it's even giving you, and that gets you faster to the answer. And that to me is AIOps, because that is just leveraging it from a daily basis. And so, Joe, you started touching on this, and this is going to open up a can of worms, but AIOps could just be adding MCP servers to data points within your environment so that you can quickly connect those things to your agents or your centralized LLM for your company, and that you can actually have these conversations. Yep. And then you can actually go get context from these things, and you can go out and get them for Azure, AWS, all these cloud providers. Yep. The documentation is then now at your fingertips. And it's just one of these things that accelerates. That's why, but Broadus, you hit the nail on the head. You still got to have the foundational things to go out, but they do make it easier. They are like you have a personal assistant.
Yeah. You can learn anything. And so, okay. So what I'm trying to do is connect the execs to like talent. So have them both understand what matters to each, right? So let's say when someone creates a list of engineers they're trying to hire to fix this type of problem, from the executive standpoint, what do they care about? Like when they're looking at this, what do they like? I don't care about this. I don't care about that. I really care about this. What does that look like?
I mean, let me take a step back on this, because I think the hiring process has become convoluted, where you have AI agents that are talking to AI agents in the hiring process. Right. The truth is, executives can leverage this to parse out specific types of candidates that would be a waste of time. For example, to Clinton's point, if you don't know DHCP, then don't put this in front of the guy because it's a network company, right? For example. The fact is, though, is it's being leveraged so heavily right now to where good candidates are being left in the side because an agent doesn't pick up their capabilities because nobody talked to them. So it's important, again, human in the loop. There needs to be that initial screening, right? And, maybe you look to make sure that there's data points on a resume and you provide feedback, right? To where the candidate can be like, hey, let me update my resume so I can resubmit it. And then you can use AI to validate that or look for patterns. Now, obviously, there'll be people who can go and fake it out. Again, it's the historical story. It's not historical. I saw a clip on this a couple of weeks back where it showed a guy that created an AI agent to write his resume, and then another AI agent for the recruiter read it and then rejected it. And then when he got the email, he had an agent to respond back, telling them that they were wrong. So it's all AI driven. So, the human in the loop part has to be important there. So because right now, there's so many problems with the AI process for finding a viable candidate that it almost has to be, a live person talking in that initial screen. Mm-hmm. So they can fix that. That's kind of the problem. And because you, again, miss a lot of good candidates because an AI agent misses, something because it's tuned to look for 5 keywords, for example.
Right.
And keywords were written different, but they're the same words. You know what I'm saying? So
that's unfortunate. Because they're looking for a great candidate who's really strong in this area. And like I said, they're creating a culture or environment where they're not strong in the area because they don't understand where the human.
Think about scenario-wise. I'm looking for a candidate that knows Kubernetes. We'll pick our Kubernetes. And say this guy writes in and he talks about how he's in-depth in Helm charts and he understands how to write, Halloumi code for orchestrating containers, but he doesn't mention the word Kubernetes. But all those interface with Kubernetes, right? Mm-hmm. Missed that, and it turns out this was the right candidate because they're trying to adopt, Halloumi, or they're trying to adopt, to orchestrate your, VMs to Kubernetes, for example. That's a very real problem. A lot of people will write something and not say, "Hey, I'm a Kubernetes expert." They're focused on saying, "Hey, I'm an automation expert." Kubernetes, you should assume that is one of my tools that I automate for. But if you're not implicit and very, specific about what that is, then you'll get left out.
Two counterparts to that, Joe. Wouldn't the LLM agent, shouldn't it have enough brains to know that those things are tied together?
Yes, but if it's not,
I'll start there.
Pick it up. If it's not trained to it, pick it up, and you know that's right.
I mean, I'm just putting it out there. If they're an automation engineer, that to your point, I think it's a great point, and I think So I was just kind of curious what your opinion on that was. So.
No, I mean an LLM has to still be trained. You still have to put the garbage in, garbage out story.
Yeah.
Very true.
If you don't train it, it's not going to know to look for it. Now, if you have hooked into this is for the guys that are building their own LLMs, right? So that's if you got something that's more seasoned, then it should pick it up and say, hey, this guy knows they picked on 7 things that supports Kubernetes. That's your guy. But you still have to have some human in the middle to teach it, human in the loop to teach it what to look for.
And the second point that I was going to point out though is if I'm looking for an AIOps lead, a person that kind of I'm trying to figure out who can lead up this effort within my organization, or if I need to go external as far as an executive and trying to make this more of a focus within my organization. It's going to be, I'm looking for somebody who can kind of see a bigger picture at times. And maybe they might not know all the technical things that they need to master across many different domains, but are they curious? Like for me, I always wanted to find those team members that they can't let go of a problem. Like I can tell it just, and I would always ask really open-ended questions around like, tell me about a problem that you experienced one time and what you did to solve that problem. And I would want to see how far they would go down in that depth stack, see if there is some scars from that, because that would tell me like if they couldn't let go, like because people that solve problems, they have no problem coming up with examples of places where because Joe hit the nail on the head. Almost in 80% of the organizations I've worked with or worked at, it's usually a very small handful of people that actually everybody went to. Everybody else was just doing what they always figured out behind the scenes. And so you have this loop of people that there's always a small group of people within every organization that really understand what is going on, how to fix it, or understand how to even troubleshoot it to figure it out. And it's those curious people that they can't let go of those problems. And so that's why I always look for that type of person. And the reason I focus on that for AIOps is because we are innovating concepts that we've never done before ever within the industry. So you need somebody who will take that problem home and they're sitting there cooking, or they're driving home and it's dead silent in their car and they're just thinking about that problem and they're just working it over in their head. And it's going to be them maybe putting a swing set together for their kids that they'll go, oh, this is what we should do. And it's that kind of connecting those dots that I envision that some of these people are going to really take AIOps to even another level. The stuff I'm saying is like, I always had this pain around this thing around observability. Now I can put these AIOps or these AI tools on top of it and instantaneously have these resolutions to it way faster than me having to spend hours going, putting the data, getting it shaped up. Now we have it already and maybe transform load into a centralized database where we can actually put an LLM on it. It all comes back to what Joe was saying though, around garbage in, garbage out. But that's what I'd be looking for if I was an executive sitting in their seat trying to find somebody. This is who I'm looking for in that regards.
Yeah, have someone who understands strategy, right? I think every operations lead, if he's not strategic, he or she's not strategic, they're not the perfect. Right? You got to be able to understand.
Okay, so with that, right, as we wrap up, what is a good book to help them learn about strategy right now? Off the top of your head, go right in. Let me see.
You've exposed me. I don't have a good answer for that. Still figure that out, Clinton.
Like what level? I mean, like I think of like strategies in different levels of like what you're trying to accomplish. So could you give me
No, I can't.
Okay.
No. Just okay. From
I'll give one though. Fruition by Chris Potts.
Fruition by Chris Potts. Okay.
Yeah. And it will spin your head around. That's, I mean, in a way that I'd almost caution people to read it. So.
Oh, so now
I mean, it was not an easy read for me because I'm like, what? No, and it challenged me in ways I never. For me, that was me personally.
So is it one of those things? Because one thing I'll say, and I'm sorry, y'all, but I gotta get this
you
off.
put me on the spot though.
One thing I'll say is, one of the things I tell people, to be successful in this industry, you have to be extremely coachable. And we go by what is called a teachability index, where number one, you have to have a willingness to learn, and number two, you have to have a willingness to change, right? So, is that book that you're talking about, did that challenge you? Because we have beliefs that we think or been taught, right? You laugh,
Yeah.
we have beliefs that we've been taught like it should be this way. Does that book challenge those beliefs in ways where we have to be an empty vessel and say, okay, this could be the factor to help me think differently, or it's just like a shocking?
It was for me. Simply as that, yeah. And I can actually grab. It's actually right over here over my left shoulder. But I mean, it's.
You can also who moved my cheese? That's a good one too. Like talks about me.
Yeah, that's a that's a good one.
What is it?
Who moved my cheese? It's a good one.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
putting some books in here.
I actually bought that for my teams before I realized you should never buy books for your teams because they never read it. So just give it to them.
Yeah, I know a specific instructor that got frustrated because Clinton and I have a mutual friend where he works at that had us do a book of the month club and a specific instructor.
Yeah, they did.
Because they wanted to write it. He's like, we're writing book reports now. Come on, dude. But I mean, read though, educate yourself. That's the important part. I read a ton of it. Finishing up a book about Lana Parker, which was a family member.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just picked this one. Like maybe it has something to do with tech after I read it, but I'll just pick this 48 Laws of Power up, and
I haven't read that one. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, so 48 Laws of Power. I'm gonna open it up probably tonight and check it out. But yeah,
I want to call something out on this though.
Okay.
Like, when just because you read a book and you find it very interesting, it's not until you start implementing those ideas that I really feel like you actually do change. Because while, and I think that's why I called that Fruition book out by Chris Potts, was because it actually shifted how I work. It shifted my mindset of how I approach things. And so, Broadus, from your perspective, has that book done that for you? Because it's like, to Joe's point, when they made us read this book, I read it and I'm like, you guys aren't doing any of this. Y'all might think it's cool as hell that y'all think this book is really good, but what's the point of reading it if we're not going to implement the ideas that it talks about? So it's like,
absolutely. So this book I haven't started. So I'm starting this tonight. Yeah. So what Clinton is saying is knowledge without being applied is basically having no knowledge at all.
Yeah.
Wasted time.
Wasted time. You can read the book.
I had a guy who worked for me a couple years back that was frustrated at how I managed him, and he said, you need to go read this book, Boundaries for Leaders. And I thought, man, that's very degrading, right? And like I was encroaching on his boundaries by holding him to a 8-hour business day. He felt like he should be able to go do whatever he wanted to, right? And I started reading it, and to Clinton's point, when I started incorporating what that book talked about Boundaries for Leaders, he didn't like it because the book wasn't about me respecting their boundaries. It was about me doing exactly what he was asking me to do and letting him just do whatever he wants because he wanted the sake of comfort. And we'll get to that at 10 o'clock at night. When there's nobody there, customers not working, things like that. So, the Clinton's point, if I had actually taken time to read the book and incorporate that, it fine-tuned my management capabilities there. It taught me a lot about, what those boundaries are. And I incorporate that to what I do today, even though I'm not a people leader, right? I'm a thought leader. I still have to incorporate that in place, right? So if you go read these types of books, the human brain also has the effect of garbage in, garbage out as well, right?
Yeah.
So make sure you read books that make sense for what you're doing. You can get inspiration out of a lot of things. I've read I forgot the name of it. It was Stanley McChrystal wrote a book about chatbots. And it's a special forces book, right? When you start digging into that book, there's some things that are very easily applied to day-to-day life as well, too, and how they gathered intelligence and how they acted on types of intelligence, right? And he was very heavy on OODA loops, right? Those observe, orient, decide, act, those type of loops. That's something that's very relevant in today's society, especially when you're looking at AI implementation. So you can get stuff from just regular books that may not even be tech related, but just make sure you're looking for, an answer to, what you're trying to achieve with read a book.
No, that's good stuff.
Probably you don't have to take all of it, just snippets of it, stuff that makes sense.
Yep.
And that I do want to call that out.
You'll see those changes.
Yeah.
So I do hope this live was super valuable to y'all. What we try to do is just, Joe has a series called Everyday AI, bringing on thought leaders like Clinton, and this really helped shape my mind in thinking differently as we look at the industry. And hopefully for those that are watching, whether you're a leader or whether you're a beginner, it really shapes your mind to start thinking different and what the industry is expecting from someone like you. And if you're a leader, what your people are expecting of you and how you can move the culture forward. Clinton and Joe, once again, thank you, gentlemen, for just joining us on this live. And Joe publishes everyday AI pieces every Friday, so make sure you check out. You said what you say?
9 a.m. tomorrow.
Look 9 a.m. tomorrow, a new piece coming out. Make sure you follow him to get that. Listen, just read those. If you don't want to read a book, just start with reading those type of articles, and it's going to change the way you think. All right. Clinton, what was the name of the book again?
Chris Potts' Fruition. It's a part of a trilogy series in which Chris is famous for teaching or really educating a lot of people around enterprise architecture. And so
not Chris Pratt, Chris Potts.
Chris Potts. Yep.
On Amazon. Go get it.
All right. I'm gonna check it out myself. But hey, make sure you check out that write-up. Joe's dropping tomorrow, 9 a.m.
We'll be back in a couple weeks too. We got we got a lot to talk about AIOps. It's going to be a very broad discussion. This is just the tip of the iceberg. So.
Yes, sir. And for those who are in the Mid-Atlantic, stay safe this weekend.
Yeah.
And let's continue to uplift our career, uplift ourselves, and just change 1% every day. And let's continue to level up for 2026, y'all. Thank y'all so much for joining us. We are out of here. Until next time.
Have a good one.